Good evening, outdoorsy folks. I'm Alexa, the resident ookie spooky girly, and somehow I survived spending a couple of summers in the great outdoors when I was younger. Yeah, my family had a seasonal site at a provincial park, and honestly, nothing compares to the feeling of driving down a clear forest road with just your music playing and no cell service. Ergo, you're not bothered. Question for y'all, what are some of your favorite summer memories? Let me know in the comments, and welcome to the top 5 scary park ranger stories that left experts terrified. Number 5. Yellowstone Hot Springs. This took place on August 16th of 2022 when an employee of Yellowstone spotted a foot in a shoe floating in a hot spring in the national park. It was located in the Abyss Pool in the southern part of Yellowstone and led to the temporary closure of the West Thumb Geyser Basin and its parking lot. For reference, Abyss Pool is approximately 53 feet deep with temperatures of around 60 degrees Celsius. As someone who melts in 24-degree weather, youch! For today's learning point, in such hot springs, superheated water cools as it reaches the surface, sinks, and is replaced by hotter water from below. The circulation prevents the water from reaching the temperature needed to create, a geyser. Hot springs are amongst Yellowstone's most famous attractions but can also be dangerous, even deadly, with the park's website claiming they've injured or killed, more people than any other natural feature. At least 22 people are known to have died from hot spring related injuries in and around the park since 1890. Visitors are warned to stay on the boardwalks and trails in thermal areas, where some of the pools and springs have a thin, breakable crust covering the scalding and sometimes acidic water. Don't believe me? Here's another example. On June 7th of 2016, an Oregon man died and dissolved after falling into a boiling, acidic hot spring at Yellowstone National Park. 23-year-old Colin Scott was hiking through a prohibited section of the park with his sister, Sable, when Scott fell into a hot spring and could not get out. Deputy Chief Ranger Laurent Verres told a local news station that the siblings were searching for a place to hot pot, which, you guessed it, is the very illegal practice of swimming in one of the park's hot springs. Sable was filming a video of her brother intentionally walking off of the North Geyser boardwalk when he fell in. According to police, the smartphone recorded the moment he slipped in and fell into the pool and her efforts to rescue him. Now, there's no cell phone service at the basin, so Sable rushed to a nearby museum for help. Heads up for the squeamish people, you might want to skip ahead a minute, I'm about to describe some stuff that might turn your stomach. When park officials arrived, portions of Colin Scott's head, upper torso, and hands were visible in the hot spring. In a later report, park rangers rationalized that the visual evidence of several thermal burns, combined with the known temperatures of the springs and a lack of movement, meant that Colin was beyond saving. They described being able to identify a V-neck style shirt and what appeared to be a cross resting on what was left of Scott's face. Rescuers were unable to safely recover his body due to the volatile thermal area and an incoming lightning storm. When officials returned the following morning, Scott's body was no longer visible, with the consensus among the rescue and recovery team being that the extreme heat of the hot spring, combined with its acidic nature, dissolved the remains. A wallet and a pair of flip-flops belonging to Scott were all that were recovered. Let this be a warning to you out there. If there's a rule, it's probably for a reason. Don't mess with the experts. Number 4. Camping trip gone wrong. This tale comes from Will Rowland, who is a former park ranger who is often tasked with running summer camp programming as well. As someone who works in young folks entertainment, I can't imagine how stressful it would be running a summer camp for them. Yeah, no thanks. This mess takes place during an overnight camping trip, and the first time the ranger had explored the terrain location, which is red flag number 1 in my book. Every camp session, Will would lead what he'd call a night game, which he described as a very scary game where the kids have to complete several tasks while the leaders scare the heck out of them. Obviously, this camp session was no different. Those in charge, masked up as monsters and hid out in the woods close to the checkpoints the campers had to pass. While running in between checkpoints, Will found an open stretch of forest with little to no foliage, so it was ideal for chasing after the charges. There was no real room to hide besides behind the trees, so he couldn't use his flashlight or they'd be able to see him from miles away. According to him, it was dark, like the unsettling kind of dark that plays tricks on your eyes, and you start imagining things that aren't real. As a scare actor, that's my kind of happy darkness. During his stay there, he saw a shadow that was around his size running past a few times, but he couldn't see it very well, so he just assumed he was imagining things because, nothing was there when he turned his flashlight on. The game was nearing its end when Will saw the shadow again, but this time he could see it vaguely standing near a tree not too far away. He originally assumed it was one of the other leaders hiding to scare folks and decided to go over there as it was about time to go back. He aimed his flashlight towards the tree, and while getting closer, noticed that there was indeed someone standing there, dressed in what looked like a torn burlap sack with their head covered by a few white plastic bags that looked like they were tied together. He started to feel pure dread. Something felt really off and asked if everything was okay, but they didn't respond. The only thing he heard was a weird sound he described as someone knocking on wood. Now, if this were a rational person, like myself, this is where you would hightail it out of there and never look back. But Will appears to be a very brave person. He ventured closer until he was about 10 meters away from whatever the heck this was, and the knocking sound turned out to be a person smacking his head repeatedly into the tree, and Will believed him to be male presenting, barefoot, and his arms and legs were covered with crusted mud, while his hands were in a weird, cramped position. Will was convinced this was just one of the other leaders pulling a prank, so he told the unknown creature to, knock it off. In a response, the creature slowly turned his head and started started walking towards him. Finally, this is where Will's common sense kicked in and told him to run, feeling as if he was in serious danger. He heard the creature running after him, but thankfully Will never turned around, and the creature never caught up to him. Will arrived back at the campsite, and every single person that could be dressed like that was already there, and couldn't have gotten there before him and had enough time to get changed. The next day, Will ventured back into the forest, since as he put it, who knows, maybe some weirdo ate the wrong mushroom and might be out there dying from hypothermia. I can see the sense of preservation is losing to curiosity in this case. The common sense was somewhat there, since he took someone else with him just in case, and there was originally nothing but endless trees. The duo arrived at the tree where Will saw the person banging his head, and there was a dead, skinned, decomposing rabbit nailed to that tree. Police were notified, but didn't seem to care too much about the case, as is the norms with things that are out of the ordinary. Sadly, I don't have any identifiers for exactly what forest it is, but my common sense is somewhat intact. Number 3, Ghost Dog. Mo Luttrell has been a ranger in the USFS for almost 15 years, but this scary story took place during his 3rd year of employment. His station was getting calls about a lone wolf with a collar on hanging around campsites, which he found weird, since wolves aren't, known to be in the area, but when you work in the field long enough, you start to realize anything is possible. Thankfully, no calls had mentioned violent behavior from said animal. Mo departed from the station around noon to check out the places that had been sighted, and wandered around for about 3 hours until he took a break for water. When he was getting ready to go again, the thing appeared about 20 feet away, trotting near the tree line. It seemed friendly and had the collar, so Mo whistled to it, and it bounded over to him. And once the creature got closer, he quickly realized it was just a big dog and not a wolf. And they lived happily ever after. Come on, y'all should know better than that. Mo radioed in and reported that he had the dog with him, but just as he said those words, the dog took off. He chased the dog through the forest for at least 5 minutes before it slowed down near a rock bed / creek area and started pacing around a spot. Mo got closer and noticed the overgrowth had almost disguised what appeared to be bones. So he called it in immediately, and another team was sent to recover the remains. And when he went to retrieve the dog, it was just gone. The bones were identified as a teenage male's, died by a self-inflicted wound to the head. He'd been reported missing in the area long before Mo became a ranger, and there'd been pretty much no hope of finding him. Mo spoke to his mom on the phone, and she asked how he'd found her son. He mentioned the big dog, and was met with silence from the mom. After he gave a couple of details about the dog, she quietly explained that her son, who struggled with making connections, had sunk into a deep depression after the death of his best friend, the very dog that had led Mo to him. What a very good doggy. Pardon me, I think I've got tears in my eyes. Number 2, Wooded Cryptid. This story comes from Reddit user CloudGod13, and while I usually tend to stay away from Reddit as a source since it's harder to verify credibility, this one was too good to ignore. Cloud was the lone recreation ranger in a small district in southern Idaho, and the nearest town from the guard station was about an hour and a half away by car for reference. After moving into the guard station, the solar powered system just wasn't working, and Cloud hadn't slept well for about a month due to various factors such as bats in the cabin, something walking on the deck at night, and the eerie nature of the woods. So about 2 months into the job, he started to hear something walking and scratching on the deck at night, specifically on the door. The district was known for its badgers and beavers, so originally he didn't think much of it. When leaving the cabin at night though, he always had an eerie feeling like he was being watched. One night, he was returning from a grocery run, and that eerie feeling came over him, and overwhelmingly so. After stepping out of the vehicle, he looked to the right of the cabin, and about 50 feet from his front door, and all he could see were 2 eyes around 4 feet in the air, and like any rational person, freaked out. He started yelling, "Get the F out of here," but the eyes only crouched down and inched closer. At this point, he could tell it was some, sort of large animal, but definitely not a coyote. Cloud tossed a piece of firewood in the general area, and the creature leaped back a bit, but didn't make a sound. He tossed around 4 to 5 more pieces, and the creature still inched forward. At this point, Cloud fumbled with the keys to the residence, but eventually managed to get inside and grabbed his firearm for safety and returned outside. The creature was even closer now, but in the light of his headlamp, Cloud wasn't able to identify anything distinctive. He continued to throw chunks of wood at the being until it fled. That night, he proceeded to sleep with his piece, and in the morning, the trail crew arrived and found mountain lion tracks all over the porch, rocking bench, and compound leading back to the creek. After that event, Cloud always heard the rocking chair move and someone or something walking on the porch, but never found any tracks after that. Considering that it was always muddy up there, it was weird to not find any tracks. He'd been stalked by mountain lions before and never had that eerie feeling like he did in those woods. My money, it's on a shapeshifter. Number 1, Bighorn Mountains Mystery. Another Reddit tale for y'all, and this one comes from user Camel Panda, taking place in July of 1985. His dad was an avid outdoorsman, and together they'd go on many adventures together in the woods. On this particular day, they were hiking down a very steep slope to get to an area of a creek that had been dammed up by beavers, hoping to catch some big trout. Panda had climbed out on a rock ledge and was looking for a way down when he saw the stock and action of an old rusty rifle sticking out of a tree, where the tree had grown around the barrel years before, about about 10 inches above the ground. He and his dad climbed down to check it out, finding a small cave at the base of the rock formation. Inside they found 3 heavy unopened cans of food, an old cast iron pot that had holes rusted all the way through it, a crusty old saddle and bridle set, and a very deteriorated heavy wool blanket rolled up and tied with a leather belt. When they unwrapped the blanket, they found several personal items, including a rusty old cap, and ball black powder revolver, a leather satchel with a lead pistol shot, a powder horn with no black powder in it, a tarnished old cartridge, a straight razor, and most unsettling was a shirt with holes in it and over half of it stained in red. The only thing that somewhat dated this fateful campsite were the weapons, both of which were made sometime in the 1870s. Now, there's no way to ever know what happened to the man who owned all this stuff, but the fact that he or someone he knew was obviously targeted twice with either a firearm or arrows and all his belongings were sitting right where he left them, possibly 100 years later, it was highly unlikely he left that area alive. Discovering what amounts to be a 100-year-old crime scene in the very remote wilderness freaked out Camo, and rightfully so. I sadly don't know what he and his dad did with what they found, but I'm hoping the family of the deceased has been given closure. And that brings us to the end of our time, and suddenly it seems like a miracle I made it this far in life. If rangers can identify weird things, I wouldn't be much better off. If you enjoyed my ramblings today, could you help us out by giving this video a like, subscribing if you aren't already, hit the bell for more terrifying content from us here at Top 5 Scary Videos, and I'll see y'all next time, you lovely spooky people.